Hello, listeners. Yamina here. Welcome to the Dr. GPCR podcast. Before we jump into this new episode, we have exciting news to share with you. The new Dr. GPCR ecosystem platform is almost ready for launch. What is it about, you ask? Well, think about a place where GPCR scientists, trainees, and GPCR organizations can thrive and where it's all about science and GPCRs. Access is restricted to members of the field, and each sign-up will be approved accordingly. Once your sign-up is approved, you'll be able to enter the ecosystem and interact with GPCR colleagues like never before. You can still sign up to be an ecosystem beta tester. We are going to open the ecosystem slowly to ensure that you get the best experience. Please keep in mind that the Dr. GPCR ecosystem is a unique place, a first and one of a kind, where we want to make sure that you get the best experience out of this new world. Visit drgpcr.com/ecosystem to start your GPCR journey. Also, make sure that you mark your calendar for the third edition of the Dr. GPCR Summit. This year, the summit will be held between October 10th and 16th. Stay tuned as we are working on the program for the summit. Visit drgpcr.com to find out about all our activities. And now, let's dive into this episode. Hello, everyone. This is Yamina from Dr. GPCR, and I have the pleasure of talking to Dr. Stuart Maudsley. Hey, Stuart.
Hi, Yamina. Thanks again. It's wonderful to be back. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
I'm excited to talk to you today, and today we decided to take apart the topic of mentorship in science. And so we're going to focus our discussion on mentorship in science. I'm hoping we can make a series out of this. But before we talk about mentorship in science, let's just think a little bit about what is mentorship. So what do you think mentorship is in general?
Well, to me, I think, mentor is a person that, someone that you learn from, someone that instructs you. To me, though, a mentor, the most important thing that your supporter or instructor can do for you in science is inspire you. And it's inspired by example and by leadership. I don't tell people what to do. I tell them, I want you to work hard. I want you to want to succeed. I've done this. People have done this for me. I'm here to make you drive yourself to excel, push the boundaries. So my mentoring, in a way, is very uninstructive. And the inspiration is a mixture of, oh, look at me, I really enjoy what I'm doing. I think it's super cool. We can do things that have never been done before. And I really enjoy it. And I'm 50 years old and I'm still doing it. And I could still feel enthusiastic and pumped up by it. So look, this could be you in the future if you want to be like me. You can still enjoy it. You can still have the fires burning. So that's the inspiration side. Then, of course, in amongst that is the progress and the presentation of progress of research. And that's a really important thing that mentors really have to do. And I think it's often a thing which people have taken the eye off slightly because it's a difficult thing in science, because a lot of science is about finding a niche and plowing that niche, and that's it. And that's not inspiring. It's not. So what you should really be doing is inspiring people to change and to be happy and look forward and actually engineer that into their work. So that's sort of like inspiration by challenge, essentially, that you should always be challenged. And so here's me, I've done it, I've enjoyed it, but I've challenged myself all the time, and it is difficult. What I try and downplay, but I always tell people if I'm interviewing them, is I don't sugarcoat things, is that it is difficult. It is not easy, but that's the beauty of it. If it was easy to do, it wouldn't be inspiring.
And everybody would be doing it.
Exactly. And it's sort of, so that's, the mentor in that way is important in not hand-holding. I think hand-holding is a bit of an old-fashioned thing. I think you should enter into a mentor-mentee relationship as equals. I always tell my people, don't call me professor, don't call me doctor, don't call me this, just call me Stuart. I'm just part of the team. I don't wish to be seen as like, I'm the oldest person, sure, and so I have the most experience, but that doesn't mean that I have the best insight, because often insight can come from different places. And as a mentor, one thing I do with a team, I don't reproduce me, because there's no point. I hire people and work with people that are different, have different skills, different views, different opinions, different ways of working. So when it comes to also being a mentor in that way, you have to be flexible. You have to understand that each member of your team is a different person completely, and you have to be the football manager. You have to say, okay, well, each person I have to deal with in a slightly different way, have different expectations and different modes of motivation and inspiration. But as I said, to me, I lead by inspiration, essentially. And I also try and lead by example. So, and that's one thing that I really, whenever I interview, I always tell people I take the moral high ground in virtually every single circumstance that I possibly can. And I say, I know, and then this is one thing I always discuss with students, because I know it's a real issue, and I was never taught about it. And I think it's one of the biggest lessons I've learned, is there will be times when your morals are challenged. And I say that there will be a point in time in science where you'll be given two choices, and it's at your point, that's your decision. My choice was to take the moral high ground. Other people don't. One is successful, one could be less successful, but it depends what you call success. So I hope that I've always opened people's eyes to that fact of life, because I think it's a fact of every single workplace and every single process. I think it's not all perfect, but just to give people the idea that this is reality, and always remember that you have to take responsibility for your actions. So, as a leader, I took this phrase from a film that I like, it's like,
no, but I think you had a lot of important and very interesting points, and let's just unwrap that. I love, before we hit record, we were talking about mentorship versus being an apprentice and being a professor, being a, quote unquote, a boss.
Yeah.
And you made the great point of saying, well, a mentor isn't somebody who is directly your supervisor, quote unquote. And I think we should explore the differences between the two. A mentor is someone, and I love the fact that you mentioned that it's someone that you should consider as your equal, and they should also consider you as an equal. That being said, mentors typically have more experience. So, you mentioned that you're 50 years old. You have more experience. That's it. You're 25, 25 plus with more experience.
Absolutely.
And also, the question I have is, I think there's something that I had when I was a master's student or a PhD student, and we were always told, oh yes, find yourself a mentor, is how do you decide who you'd like to be your mentor, and how do you approach them?
Oh, okay. Well, that's a really good question. And that's one thing that we sort of mentioned a little bit before we started recording. I think I like to be radical. I like to be different all the time. I can't resist it. I don't think you should have one mentor. I think you should have as many mentors as you find useful. And your mentor could be someone that you just know. It could be just a personal friend mentor who actually cheers you up, or who can listen to you vent, or listen to you after bed. That's mentoring. It's, our concept of mentoring is very one-dimensional, and it's much more complex than that. So I would, if you were an aspiring scientist, really understand that you need lots of mentors, really. And I think, so I was recently helping giving an awards at the FNR, the National Research Fund of Luxembourg, and we had a special night of mentoring and mentoring awards. And the beautiful thing there, was very nicely done, and it was really good to see appreciation of an often underappreciated aspect of science. The majority of aspects of science that get rewards are science and nature papers and blah, blah, blah. That's really obvious, but actually those things are the end product of a lot of effort, and a huge amount of that effort goes into mentoring and management and encouragement and personnel regulation. So I think the important thing is to realize that mentors could be everywhere. They could be your supervisor, it could be your postdoc, could be a fellow grad student, they could be just somebody that you meet on a bus. You can get, we have this idea of lifelong, sort of master and Padawan learner and stuff. And all you do is learn from that one person, and then you can be a master Jedi like them one day. But no, learn from everyone. You could have a micro mentoring experience just on a bus somewhere, and someone says, "Hey, you've ever thought about this?" Take every bit of helpful advice that you ever can find, and you're going to always juxtapose it also with unhelpful advice as well. And it's it's like, here's another movie quote. I could live my entire life on movie quotes, and everyone knows that. But this is from American History X, and it's a great film. It's a tremendously powerful film. If you haven't seen it, you have to see it. And Avery Williams is talking to Ed Furlong, or Ed Norton, sorry, and he's saying, what have you done in your life that's made your life better? And you should always think about every interaction you ever have. Use it to make your life better, both personally, socially, scientifically. Because if you apply that and you filter out and sift out all the advice and comments that you get, that's the best way to do it. It's my job, a lot of my job is doing biomedical, investigation and research computationally and stuff. And I have to deal with good and bad data and good and bad, intellectual findings. And they're all useful because the bad ones can show you flaws in the process and the good ones will be functionally helpful. So with respect to finding a mentor, find as many as you can for as many aspects of your life, because if that's one thing that I would tell all my students about science, your success in science comes from every molecule of your body and every aspect of your personality and every aspect of your life. I used to, my sort of like calming mantra was hitting free throws, or hitting, 3-point shots and stuff. When that goes well, brain's working really well, and my brain is calming down. So use everything you've got, both in your skill set and in what you can learn from other people. And it's sure. If you work with someone and they've spent their entire life working on GPCRs and know everything, you will learn a lot about GPCRs from that person. You might not learn everything about doing science and how to get on with people and how to work effectively. So go and learn that from somebody else who might not have that experience. That's the thing. Experience that's written on paper is easy to see. Intellectual and emotional quotient experience you often can't see, but you will see it around in the lab. You'll see how somebody deals with a situation, or you see how somebody can work effectively in different conditions. Exactly. So
somebody doesn't deal with a situation. I think that's also, as you mentioned, it's a great example as to what not to do.
Exactly. It's and actually, we always think of this thing as like, a person sitting down telling somebody else. Just observing, just watching, just seeing. And it's like, I can't tell you how many times I've told people in my lab, all you have to do in science is just observe. Just observe. Yep. You don't have to talk. The things are there in front of you, but keep your eyes open all the time. So you might learn things. You might get a mentor who actually never talks to you. It might be really fascinating in that way that you watch them and see how they operate. And they're not actually directly mentoring you, but you can learn the mentoring skills from them and you can learn what they learn. So it's treat it like, if you're looking for someone, find as many people that can help you as you can. So I'll say, it does take a village to mentor. I would say that.
And it does. And please.
No, it's cool.
I was going to say, and I think a lot of times students and trainees think about, as you mentioned, the mentor and the mentee relationship, and that one person knows everything and you're there to learn from them, which again, and we agree on this, it's not true. Mm-hmm. But think about the fact that you as a person who has many mentors could at some point become somebody else's mentor.
Exactly.
And it's all about passing down that wisdom.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's a responsibility thing as well. I always see it as like, it's part of a payback process. I've had, tremendous mentors in many ways in many different places. And I've always seen, so one thing I actually pay back in two ways. I try and pay back by my primary mentor by respecting them and helping them and doing as many things for them as I can. But I also pay back what they've done for me by mentoring and hopefully using all those good circumstances and good inputs to the next person. So, and the one person I've done that with the most, the one person I learned an awful lot from was Lou Luttrell, when I was at Duke with Bob Lefkowitz. And the greatest thing that Lou taught me was, I was sort of Lou's Padawan learner, and I was always the head scratching one that was always coming up with funky data. And God bless him, every single time I showed Lou something and I was like frustrated with it, he'd pluck a little bit of positivity out of it and say, yeah, you know what, this is still good and we can do that. Always putting the silver lining on whatever crappy research they had. And so every single time that I have a student who comes to me with something funky, I say, this is very interesting. And I think about, okay, what would Lou do in this situation? How would he help be positive and try and make the student feel better? Or at least, feeling better is one thing, but untangling the problem is everything, because the majority of people are smart enough to understand that it hasn't worked, but you want to work out why. And spending that time and fixing the problem, it is mentoring in a way. It's telling you and it's showing you the mechanisms of getting your way out of these problems. And that's the most important message, I would say. It's just never get too down on yourself and then realize that you can untangle everything, because as far as you can unwind the problem. And learning to get over that was a tremendous experience for me. And it's one thing that I've often had students here show me things that are just bewildering and think, oh my God, how on earth can I work this out? And eventually we sit down and say, hey, don't worry, no one's to blame, we'll sort it, we'll fix the problem, and that's it. And those are the best mentoring moments. It's like, it's like Apollo 13. It's not the worst time for NASA, it's the best time for NASA. It's to solve the problem. That's what everything is about.
Yeah. And I think students have that. You're breaking up sometimes, so we're going to have to try and edit this out. But what I wanted to say is that you didn't say it out, but I think the point that's also important to point out is the fact that it's not the student the problem. It is a scientific problem. And just because you've done an experiment that doesn't look like you wanted it to, or you don't understand what happened, that it is not your fault. It's science putting a challenge in front of you.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of learning to adapt to that and to expect it, and to expect the fact that you are trying to grasp smoke all the time, that it's virtually impossible, and to be sort of proud of your data and to stand by it, to always and this is often a thing with students. Often, there's this thing that's come in recently called imposter syndrome, which I think people had before, and now it's been codified, and now people talk about it and say, I'm a sufferer of imposter syndrome and stuff. And part of that, I think, is due to the fact of people not feeling confident in their own research, even though it is perfectly fine. And a mentor to instill that. And as you just said, the idea that, it's not your issue. As long as you did ABC correctly, whatever data you get is your data. Don't let anyone criticize it, and you explain it and describe it in the most parsimonious way, and you're right, and stand by it. And this is the essence of a problem with a lot of students, is that they're terrified of going to a conference or terrified of going to a presentation because some big cheese will eat them up and blow them out of the water. But it's like, don't. But you know your stuff better.
And sometimes it happens. Sometimes you're at a poster presentation and somebody stops at your poster and then they tell you that everything that you're doing is not good. But then again, which happened to me, I'm not going to say who, but
really?
It did happen to me. Yes. And it was so interesting because at the time my boss was right behind the poster on the other side and was listening in. And he came to my quote unquote rescue at some point, because it got to the point where I just couldn't make that person understand like, no, I get that you don't like what the project that I'm working on, or you have
Right.
something against this, but I am confident that what I have done is scientifically sound. We've done all the controls, negative, positive. We've done all the work, and the data is the data. I cannot control what the outcome is. If you
Exactly.
don't believe my data, but you know that I've done the experiment properly, there's nothing more we can talk about. And unfortunately, those things happen. And I think I was too young and too naive to take it personally. But it happens. And you can tell people, look, I let's agree to disagree. I know that what I have done is my best. I did all the controls. I've talked about it with my mentor. I've repeated the experiment enough times. The data is the data.
And that was a perfect example of negative mentoring, where you learned that someone criticizing you without any specific basis is not a person to listen to.
Exactly. And then that's also very important for students to understand, and trainees to understand this, that not everyone, it's not going to be, rose petals on the floor every time you're presenting. And then you have to defend your data.
That there will be people that operate in a...
There is a delay. That's why it seems like we keep on interrupting each other.
That there is not a problem with people disagreeing with you, that should be expected. And it's just a question of how then do you discuss that? Do you discuss it properly, or do you just argue about it? And that's a thing that is really critical with respect to dealing with this issue of imposter syndrome, is to break through that. And as you said, your mentor came in to rescue you, which is a sort of phrase we used to use, but actually it should, we should say sort of support, I would say, is that, because what they're doing there is they're showing you how to deal with a difficult person. And what they're trying to do is trying to say, oh, well, this is how I did it many years ago, and whatever, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And those are fantastic moments. And they actually do make you realize that there's this really tricky thing in science, which we've probably talked about many times before. It is this discipline that is supposed to be true and honest and purely logical, but it's done by people who are not. And it's this magical mix, and this is often, I would say, a lot of the mentoring I often have to do is exactly covering this sort of thing, is that realize, as we discussed before, we're dealing with something in which we don't even know how many unknown variables there are. When it works, feel thankful that the mystical gods of science are smiling on you all of a sudden, where you have done your best and everything seems to fit in nicely. Don't expect this every single day of the week, and don't expect to understand why, because we don't even know how many variables that we are dealing with. You have to be a little bit easy with your expectations on perfection. And this is a big issue when it comes to, say, publication presentation, because then let's say it's worked 9 times out of 10. That one time often will really, really eat away at a student, and they'll get very insecure about it. The truth is, we don't know probably why it didn't work that time. There are a million little reasons why it might not have worked. And this, I like to call it sort of a fluffy feel, is that nothing is that rock solid in anywhere in the world. And we like to create this concept that there are rock solid findings that we know and that are perfect and fantastic and stuff. And it's just, my kids, my eldest daughter's learning about, Roman numerals at the moment, and it all seems very funny and stuff. And it's like, I always tell her, the Roman Empire was one of the greatest empires ever created, and they thought pi was 3, and they were fine with that. they hated these intellectual Greeks with their irrational numbers and going, no, it's 3. Okay, it's 3. And to be honest, you can get away with it. that you missed the beauty and subtlety of 3.14, blah 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 blah. But your working heuristic solution is 3. And a lot of
the majority of it. You get the majority of it good, right?
Absolutely, is that you can do that, and this is a trick. This is an issue, because when you read things in a paper, it looks exact and precise, but the truth is, it probably wasn't. it probably wasn't as perfect as you think it was. And this really has an impact on students, I think. So I try and tell them to sort of be a bit easier on yourself and admit that the data you have and the results you have are what you got at the time. And if you're honest and you did due diligence, that's the data, and that's it. And this is so. I'll drop in the first Bob quote of the night. So my old boss, Bob Lefkowitz, is a master of quotes and memes and stuff, even before memes existed. And one of my favorite ones from Bob was, "Everyone's right." And it was a funny phrase at the time, and it's a good way to deal with people that might have differing results from you and stuff. But it's probably true, because there are lots of rights. There are lots of rights. There's not one unique one right. And we saw this in the lab, and we see it everywhere. You have this type of cell, you have this tissue, you have this response. You can never perfectly reproduce an experiment, even yourself, weeks apart. What do you expect from 1,000 miles away in a different lab, different things, different reagents, different cells, different microgravity environments of the planet and stuff? So take the pressure off yourself. And I think students are often fearful of big reputations, and also, sadly enough, fearful of making exciting and interesting and new and challenging findings, because the more radical it is, the more exciting it is. There's this, because now in the world of sort of like electronic media and instant communication of science and results, you will hit and you will impact a lot of people very quickly, and you'll find out about it if it's controversial or not. In the old-fashioned days, you just published it in a paper, and then someone would have to read it in a book 2 months later after it got bound, and that was it. And it's good and bad in a way, because often things that weren't too good just got hidden and sat there as status of fact until someone read them. Whereas now things can be tested so quickly by so many people and have an opinion on them so quickly. I think that is a thing that scientists of my time don't really appreciate of scientists today, is the level of publicity and the level of scrutiny of data, and also the level of monetary interest, especially in biomedical sciences, that are often big things to me. Back when I was a student, back when I was learning, I got into science for the intellectual journey of science, and it never occurred to me that it was a thing to potentially search for fame or glory or whatever. It was just, this was an exciting
millions
trip.
Of dollars.
yeah, and that's so. And this is what I mean about, also mentioned before, about changing and altering. As a mentor, my job has changed all this time, and as a mentor, one of the things I try and teach my students a lot and introduce them to and show them the power of it is social media, and also is having public personas, and realizing that also everything you do electronically is permanent. And when I can still find when I was a student, my very first email sent in 1996. It's ridiculous. It's still there on the internet. And I was asking people on a chat board actually how to increase NK2 receptor expression in NG10815 cells, because mine wasn't going very well. And it was fascinating. And I can still see back in exactly the time code and the timestamp and where I was and what I was doing. And it's like, wow, that's amazing. That's such an inconsequential little thing, but it's still there on the web.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm sure you had that question at the time, but I'm sure that there's other people in the world who have similar questions today. 30
absolutely.
plus or 30 years later.
Yeah.
Or a little around that time. But I think so. You made so many great points. I'm having a hard time stepping back and kind of unpacking some of these. And let's think about, okay, we were talking about conferences and data and the speed at which data is generated and data is shared. And I think the next episode of our series should cover data reproducibility issues, and the fact that
that's a good one.
You mentioned you're here 1,000 miles to the left and to the right, same cells, quote unquote, different results, and that's important. But I think the main point that you made about the mentorship aspect of our conversation is that as a mentor, you're here to teach people how to think critically. You're here to tell them that the data is not you. You as a scientist are not the data. you're the hands that creates the data, but you still have to be able to dissociate from the data, whether it's positive or negative.
Absolutely.
And that's very, very important. And also the fact that a mentor is not necessarily somebody who is your principal investigator, your PI, your boss. And then it's someone who can help you learn things, whether it's directly related to your lab work, whether it's related to your personal development, it's related to how you can get more organized in your life and at work. And I think if you want to stay with this idea of mentorship and go more into the tactical aspect, so how would you tell the students in your lab, or how would you guide them towards finding a mentor that is outside of their direct lab environment? And I'm saying this because a lot of times as a graduate student, again, going from personal history, my head was completely buried into my lab, into my project. And I didn't know what else was happening. And that may be because it was the early 2000s and there was not so much communication, not so much social media. But how do you get your students' heads out of their one little problem that they've been obsessing on for months and get them to talk to other people?
Well, this is a great thing. I mean, this was my experience, my take on this as a student, and how I worked out what to do. I did it for myself, and now this is how I do it for the students. This is how I do it. So the beautiful thing, if you are at a university or even if you're at an institute or something, that there will probably be a huge variety of lectures or seminars or courses that you can go on. Go way outside of your box. Go to a lecture on Greek philosophy. Go to an economics seminar. Go to something, a workshop in the engineering section, and if you can get in, or just watch or listen. Go to something where they're talking about politics. Go something, the process of thought is independent of the actual topics that you're looking at. The ability to dissect a problem is a purely intellectual challenge. And sure, there are specific contingencies. And sure, if you go to a lecture on the Stoics, they're not going to tell you much about caspase 3 signaling. But they'll teach you, and they'll show you something, another way of considering a problem. All people in all fields will have an intellectual input, and that they have a distinctive way of thought, or you might realize that they actually have a huge insight in what you might be doing. So I experienced this in a book, just reading about mathematics with respect to communication networks, and I realized, this is biology, isn't it? So I ended up having like a sort of like a virtual mentor of Watson Strogatz, because I learned all about communication transfer and network hubs from those guys. And they're mathematicians. They're not my field at all. But the beauty about a university education and the beauty about higher education and learning, where you would be a grad student potentially, go into different fields. Realize that all these people are smart. All these people have talents, and all these people are potential mentors. And you might realize that actually, rather than, what you need is new eyes or new ears on the problem. And thinking about your science in a different way might show you completely distinct changes in it. I mean, I wrote a paper 10 years ago now on game theory, and with respect to receptor dynamics and beta arrestin signaling, blah, blah, blah. I got this from a book by a journalist called Simon Cooper called Soccernomics. And it was introducing game theory with respect to the 2006 Champions League final between Arsenal and Chelsea or something like that, and about how the goalkeeper would use tactics against the penalty taker. And so this was nothing to do with science, but it was to do with football. But it was an interesting idea. And so ideas and solutions and mechanisms, and as we discussed before, everything in science is a solution. If there's one thing I could tell students, all you ever come across in science is problems. So all you ever have to do to be a successful scientist is fix the problem. That's all you have to do. That's all I do, is troubleshoot and fix problems.
Yep.
The creation of ideas, the delivery of experiments is easy. Really, it's easy. There are skills that you learn and skills that you do. The hard thing that you cannot predict, cannot identify, and will be the only challenge in your life is to fix the problems. Why didn't you get what you thought? Why did this go wrong? Why can't you instantly understand those results? The answers to those don't necessarily come from biological science or medicine or whatever. They might come from other thoughts and other aspects of the world. So I would seek, and as I said before, you might not need auditory mentors. You might not need a classical person, sitting down with a long beard saying, this is how I think. You could have mentors that could exist in print, exist in history, could exist in pictures, that could exist in movies, could exist in books. You can take inspiration and declarative thought processes from those people.
I love it.
I think really go outside of your box and realize that you can learn that dissection mechanism. I mean, you can learn these from antiquity, 3,000 years ago. You can apply those thought processes to your work in everyday and drawing those parallels and understanding how a fresh pair of eyes can really make a difference. And this is a great thing, and often potentially another thing to do as well, other than just going outside of your field. Just go and listen to somebody from a totally different group in a totally different lab and try and make an input on their work and try and understand it quickly. This is how I always used to gauge how smart people were, was like and one of the guys I always thought was super smart was a guy called Richard Premont, because he would always watch a presentation and come up with a genius answer and the genius question. I thought, wow, on every single time, it was always you, wasn't it, Richard? It's like, wow, that's smart. You're just intrinsically smart, aren't you? Because you don't need to be an expert. You just need to be an expert problem solver. And that comes from everywhere. And so the take-home point from that is resourcefulness. Learn the ways to fix the problem. And the majority of the time, don't look for the instant, easy answer, because it often isn't that. Because if it was, you'd have probably done it. And so
or somebody else could have done it already.
Absolutely. And I think this is a real thing that's lost in a lot of science these days, because we do run so quickly, we produce so much, and we are trying to compete, is we don't realize it's always about thinking. It's always, the doing of science has become so much. The thinking in science has become so little. And so as a mentor, I would like to get people to exercise their thinking brain a lot more rather than their doing and practical brain. And there are lots of thinkers and lots of subjects. You could read a book by Paul Krugman. You could learn something from the great Stoics or something like that. And you realize the insight is there from so many different sources. So that's what I was trying to do. I've often found inspiration from incredibly diverse and esoteric places in the world. And keeping your eyes open and being accepting and seeing the benefit, like I mentioned before. You can see the benefit in some, and you can see the detriments in others. Both are equally important. But the more quills, the more arrows you have in your quiver of input, the better chance you have to problem solve. And all you have to do in science to be successful is solve problems. That's it. And as a mentor, often if somebody heard that, they thought, wow, you're not talking about biological sciences. And no, I'm not. I'm talking about problem solving from an intellectual point of view, because you can't, you have to think your way out of the problem. And exercising your brain muscle is a thing we don't spend enough time doing.
I agree with you on this one. And I think, I love the idea of going for inspiration in other fields, in other things, looking around. And that's something that is not taught, which it should be.
Yeah.
And one other missing piece, at least looking back at my journey, is that I don't remember being taught how to think. That had to come after. you have learned the Krebs cycle by heart, and you have learned all of this information just for the time for that test. And then after that, you just, no, I don't remember the steps in the Krebs cycle. Doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
You could calculate how many ATPs, but it doesn't change anything. It doesn't help you figure out with the next problem, what's the logic behind it, or how do you solve that problem?
Exactly. And this is a big issue that I both teach and also like sort of discuss in the lab as well, is that we're now in an age, and this is one of the things about changing your view as a scientist as well as technology changes, is we're now in a world of mobile technology and in a world of, do you really need or rely, or should you really rely on cramming everything into your head and trying to hold it there forever to formulate your ideas? Or should you be smart and use your creative brain and use your resourceful brain to go and find that information? But then you also have to be smart with that resourceful information finding, because there's lots of different sources now. It's not just many artists anymore. There's not just one book. There's lots of sources. Then you have to quorum sense and see what's good and what's bad and check that with papers and see how it applies to what you're looking at. But that is offload. I don't request people to remember things. I often do it just as a test in the lab to get people to remember all the different classes and different subtypes of GPCRs and stuff. But that's just a fun thing for them to do. And when I ask them, I'll stop them in the lab and say, "Hey, can you give me an example of a class C receptor and stuff?" But just to get, but actually, and as a perfect example of that, I actually at the same time ask them to remember, because we're talking about things with heptahelical receptors, and so we're always obsessed with 7 and stuff, is the ancient wonders of the world and the modern 7 wonders of the world. And everyone had to learn and remember those, because it's got nothing to do with GPCRs, but it's reminding them about 7, and it's reminding them about learning. And it's a process that you should, not be afraid to be constantly learning all the time. And as a mentor, that's the most important lesson I can actually show people as well, is that I'm always learning. And I'm learning by changing, because the work I do every year is different. And by showing that as an example of what I do, that shows this need to develop and to be open. And I always tell these stories of where I got inspiration from and where from different places. So it's sort of, and I do miss that. And that's what science used to be like. I always, I'll always have a picture of like Da Vinci or something like that, saying, not just a scientist, an artist, and a poet and musician. All these people, I mean, when Isaac Newton used to sit down, if you had a problem with maths, he used to invent a whole branch of mathematics just to solve it. But then Isaac Newton was interested in many other things. Yeah. And I think we become too one-dimensional in both what we do as scientists, because we have to do so much, but that's really hurt the intellectual side. So teaching people, I mean, everyone should be taught Socratic method or other types of critical analysis. I think that's really vital. And questioning and being skeptical, data really support what you're saying. And I often do this with students. I will just say, don't tell me anything. Just tell me what you see. I'll put up like a slide and say, describe the figure. Don't say any opinion. Just describe the figure. And if you do that, you're way more accurate than anything else. Because opinion is, as the dude would say, well, that's just your opinion, man. There's too much opinion in just describe the figure. Just describe it. Yeah. And exactly. When you do that, you go, oh, the title doesn't make any sense, does it? Exactly. It's like
exactly, yes. But I know we're running towards the end of our time of part 1 of a series, but I wanted to take a little step back and go back to your point where you were mentioning that you can get inspired by other fields. And if I can add to that, I think talking to scientists from other fields does 2 things. One, it pushes you to talk about your science, but also it pushes you to simplify or to use different terms, because as different scientists from different fields, we don't speak the same language. And if you try and simplify it or explain to somebody who's not in your field, it forces you to think about it differently. And sometimes just saying it out loud and having a sounding board and having somebody who doesn't know anything about the GPCR field or any scientific field that you're in, asking you questions actually gets you to put together that thinking process around that particular problem that you have. And I think that's very important also when you're looking for a mentor or you're looking for a sounding board, is go outside of your lab, go outside of the field. And having both is also very beneficial. Somebody who's really good at your product, knows what you're doing, and asks you, they have that experience, but also somebody who has absolutely no idea. Somebody working on, I don't know, HDAC or transcription, or they'd be like, what's a GPCR? What does it eat in the winter?
And that's I think you've hit on a really good note there. That's one of the, when I always talk about teaching, I think, or when you talk about sort of research, is you learn the most when you teach someone about it. Because then you realize your failings and you realize the extent of your knowledge and you hear it. And actually, that is actually one of the best lessons that a mentor can teach his or her mentee, is how to be part of that chain and how to pass it on and to see how they do it. And the trick I learn is that I never expect them to do it like me. I want them to do it like them, because individual voices are very important to hear in science. And this is what I mentioned before about imposter syndrome, is people should be brave and confident in themselves at all times, because the more independent, brave voices we have, the better the science is. When there's too much dogma or too much kowtowing and too much reverence, I mean, it's good to show someone respect for what they do. But also remember, if you're a junior scientist and you're just in your first year of PhD, if you find something cool and it's reproducible, just go and own it. It's your stuff, and feel proud of your contribution. And as you say, this is one thing that, with respect to sort of going and learning from different fields, I've been to some universities, some institutes and stuff, and they've really had a great idea, and they've realized this. And what they do is they don't house people together who work on the same stuff. That they understand that you can have people together from different disciplines. So I was interviewing at one place, and they had a center for complex systems analysis, and they mixed people with ant colonies to neural networks to self-organizing molecular systems, totally different groups of people with totally different things, but coming together on a simple concept and a simple thought that, world's quite complex, isn't it? Let's try and see how we can learn different ways of untangling it. And actually, I think this is a great thing, and I've tried to institute this in many places, because this is one of the growth fields of science, and I've seen it tremendously impact my science. Is the understand, once you can see a lot, then you have to realize and understand how your complex system works. And this is how I've learned it from many different things, because you can look at it from biology to evolution to ecology to plant science to economic science. A lot of what we do is exactly the same. We're just working on a different system. So, and this is also part of the other sort of, side of mentoring that actually is very important these days now, is to progress students and to make them see, this is one of the big drawbacks, I would say, in biomedical science. People feel very much pigeonholed, that this is my thing, I've been trained in this is my PhD, this is what I'm going to do. You're a great example of the opposite. You've done something and said, hey, there is a communication ecosystem that can be created. There is a different type of way that we can apply the science that I know and love. And I think introducing that to students and getting them to be more diverse and to do different things and realize that their skills might be very intense and unique for 3 or 4 years, but these skills apply everywhere else. And this is a thing I really try and make sure as a mentor is crucial. And this is tough for a lot of scientists or potential people that have been in that narrow gap for too long. They can only see one thing and only give one type of advice. I'm more than happy. So as a mentor, the most important thing to do is to ensure success and lifelong success of your students. But it doesn't have to be as little clones of you. It could be in their very own way. And they should see that their skills and their talents that you've tried to nurture are totally interoperable, that you can use them for so many things. And understanding complex systems is the beautiful way of doing that, because everything is a complex system. Blockchain banking is a complex system. If you want to go into marketing, it's a complex system. There are all of these things, and this is the sort of the one beauty of science that the classical people used to see was everything is connected. It's like,
yes, it is. It is, and I think one thing connected, and you made again many great points, but if I take the audience back to the fact that you mentioned that your first email that went out, it's still out there, and also the fact that as a scientist, no matter what's your level, you should think outside the box, and you should have this online presence. Be careful what's online, but you should have this persona online, and then you can use your scientific knowledge in order to fuel this persona, which is a bit like what we've been doing with Dr. GPCR. Because, for example, my idea was that I do not want a pipette. I do not want my schedule to be determined by this growth rate of my hex cells, but I do want to be connected to people like yourself, to people, in the field who are actively working. And I want to talk about beta-arrestin, and I want to talk about all of these receptors and the diseases they're implicated in. And the thought was, what? The best way to do it is to talk to people and find novel ways to use my scientific background to talk about topics that I like to talk about. And that's the thought I had for students, and it's kind of more like a tactical advice. And because I think a lot of times this question comes back up, how do you find a mentor outside of your group who is not your boss?
Yeah.
And I think by going out on social media, for example, by doing science-based activities, writing articles, it doesn't have to be in Nature. You can write a LinkedIn article. You can have your own website and talk about your favorite receptors.
Sure.
And that also allows the outside. First, I think you have to do it if you find it satisfying, but it also allows the outside world to see who you are as a person, not as the pipetting hand in the lab, but as a fully developed, complete individual thinking about high-level problems in a specific field. And that helps you as an individual to find a mentor, because people are going to show interest in you. You can go out to people and say, well, Dr. X and Y, or Mr. or Mrs., or hey, Bob, Brian, you name it. I work on this. I love your work, and I was wondering if we can talk about it. And then this is my website. This is what I've been doing. And that breaks that wall and then opens doors.
Absolutely.
And that was my tactical advice to students.
Absolutely. This is what I thoroughly encourage and get all my students to adopt social media, and also instruct them the fact that, okay, you do understand this is permanent and everyone can see it, and, have a proper handle name. Don't make it silly. Because I used to know somebody that their official Gmail account was Dr. Awesome. And it's like, dude, don't put that on your CV. But I think it's absolutely fantastic, because I quite like this. I mean, let's say, someone has a Twitter account. I think it's quite nice. Or on my social media, I will post science stuff, but occasionally I'll post personal stuff as well. And that gets you to know somebody, and then gets you to someone to have, that you can understand what their interests are, how they might, I post interesting stuff that I know or I get from elsewhere. And that's just as insightful and just as important, because you have to be multidimensional. And as a student, it's wonderful now that you actually have that access. In the good old-fashioned days, you'd have to bump into them in the corridor. And so I tell people, just go and dip into someone's Twitter feed, or go on their webpage or on their sort of YouTube channel, and you can sense so much. And even if you've never talked to that person, they could be your mentor. You could learn from them. You could see what they do, see what they say, see how they investigate, see how they interact with other people. And you can learn good and bad, because you can see bad behavior on Twitter and good behavior on Twitter. And it's not a bad thing. But the most important thing is to make them realize that they do have to understand to do it professionally and blah, blah, blah. But I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it's, and especially in a world where you might feel isolated as a student, or you might not have the mentor that you want. But I think the most important thing, the last bit of advice is the most important thing in any mentoring situation. If you do have a dynamic connection, is communication. And I think having open and, as I said before, have an equality in the relationship. Say, hey, you can say anything you like, and I can say anything you like. Just drop the rank at the door and say, the reason we're dropping rank is to get things done. And if you're having a problem or an issue or you want to say something, don't be worried about the rank. It doesn't matter. You can say things off record. And all good mentors should have this in their mind, that you don't have a mental record. You can have a mental record that helps you, but allow someone to blow off some steam, allow someone to say something that they regret, and allow them to get away with it, because that's always been the situation. And, you know, my lab is my family, and you don't get rid of somebody in the family. I mean, there's not one person in the family out there that hasn't had a bust up with one of their relatives at some point in their life. It's normal. But as a family, you know what? You're a family, and you stay together.
Yeah.
And I find this tremendously in the GPCR community. There's no one that's been excommunicated as far as I know. Everyone is still there. You might love some people, you might not like people that much, but I think the way the community works so well is that we are like that we do that. I think you know, I'll run the whole sort of I love GPCRs thing. It's because we're in the most effective branch of biology, and it's a branch of biology that is all about efficacy, if you pardon the pun with respect to GPCRs, but about getting things done. It's one of the most practical parts of science that I've ever come across. It's as close to engineering as you get in molecular biology, because it's all about the therapies and all about delivering something. And I think that's what holds us together.
I think so too. I think so too. I love it. And, you know, we were talking about...
as one of my last mental phrases I'll say is that every single student I've ever had, every student I've ever had, I've said that I've never regretted a single day of getting to GPCRs, because you can do anything, anywhere, in any situation, with any type of effective outcome. It is the ultimate in flexible and efficacious. And I'm just grateful every single day that, wow.
Agreed. Sorry, our internet connection is not the best, so anyway, I was having trouble hearing you. I heard the last of it, and you know, we were talking about movie references, and I think I want to leave you and the audience with the movie reference. And the way I think about the GPCR community is, you know, in the series Suits, whenever they work in this, the two lawyers work in the same office and they fight tooth and nail in the court in front of the judge, and then they have all of these things that they do to each other in order to win. But at the end of the day, they're still friends, or they're still going to grab a drink at the end of the day. And I think that's how it should be in science as well. We can fight and we can disagree scientifically, but it's never personal.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, we can still go and grab a drink together and be like, okay, let's start again on a different problem tomorrow.
Exactly. And I think it's because we all share a similar goal, and that goal is healthcare. And I think that's what it's about. And we all put that first. And that's what's quite noble about it and quite distinct, is that all of us have that, you know, that any personal issues come a very, 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 very distant second, because we all sort of know that we're that close to getting the job done. And because we know it's the system, we know it's the way, we know it's going to work. And I think that always tempers our sort of competitiveness. And we're always, in a way, people might not say it or show it, but we're all quite happy when there's a success. And even if it might not be yours, there's never that much jealousy. And it's sort of, and that's the nice thing. If you are part of the team, you're part of the world. So a little bit of it is your success. So, you know, exactly. I think it's tremendous. I've never experienced anything quite like it. And it's sort of, I think,
and it makes me feel happy, when somebody publishes the structure of a GPCR that I particularly enjoyed working on. I didn't do the work, but I'm happy about it.
yeah, exactly.
I'm just genuinely happy about it. All right, Stuart. One last wrap-up thought before we stop this episode. If you had to tell us what is the best advice, but the best thing that you learned from a mentor that made you the mentor that you are today, who's the person you learned it from, and what did you learn?
Well, let's go back. Let's think. The best bit of advice. Well, I would say I mean, I was one of those people that only really had one postdoc, and I went to be a PI very quickly. So I very quickly had to go from being a student to a boss. Not the usual route, but it was there. So basically, my two biggest influences were Bob Lefkowitz and Lou Luttrell. So Lou Luttrell was sort of the head of sort of our lab that I was working with in Bob's big mega lab. And sort of Lou and Bob were very different personalities and yet very similar to each other in the same way. They both love GPCRs and both excellent scientists. But what I learned from Bob is the undying inspiration and drive, and the one of the true paths to success as a mentor is to really make sure that your student wants to come in the next day and wants to do that experiment and wants to do the things that are tough. And the reason you wanted to do that is you wanted to be part of the team. You wanted to be on this ride. And Bob was sort of like the magician who was like in sort of entrancing you, saying, you do want to do this, you do want to do this, and not telling you, but getting you to want to do it. And that sort of inspirational route was like eye-opening, because Bob is a personality that you want to do things for and with. Lou, very different person, very good scientist, very great and sort of wonderfully diligent. But him, it was the problem solving and the troubleshooting and the personnel management to live and kept on going even in the darkest times. So a mixture of those two people is fascinating. There's sort of the creative inspiration, and then this is how we do things when things go bad. And don't worry and keep going. So the dream and the practicality. So I try and mix the two. I try and bring those two together. So I have to be, at times, a big personality. And the most important thing is to say, this is the dream. The dream is this. 5 years' time, we do this. We're going to solve all disease. And then you have to be a bit of a showman, and you have to be excited, and you have to be slightly different. But then also you have to deal with all the issues. And as I said before, I lead by example. So I show people that I have learned these things and I put them together. And what I'm doing is I'm bridging them, and I'm saying, this is what it takes to be a mentor. And part of being a scientist is to train your students to be mentors. And that's the thing often people don't think about. Part of the training is getting a PhD. The other part of the training is to make sure that you're a mentor. And you might not be a mentor in a great big lab or whatever, but a mentor to somebody in their life, a friend to someone, helping someone through a difficult time, because science is difficult times. Micro-mentoring, and that's called being a good person. And the way society and groups of people bond together, everyone is somebody else's mentor, and somebody else is your mentor. It's this care of advice giving and care of relationships. So mentor is not an instructor. It's not top down. It's sideways, and it's upwards, and it's down. And you should always see yourself as a part of a greater machine. And that machine is a culture and a society and a group of productive individuals. And this is what we have in the world of GPCRs. And this is the wonderful thing about it, because it is like nothing else. And the reason we know, everyone says, oh, I know everyone in GPCRs. The reason we do is because we are like that. Because I think so many people in the field do have this, holistic view of mentoring, bottom up, sideways, top down. That it's not that everyone is there for advice, and that's mentoring. Good advice, bad advice, lousy
No
advice.
advice is advice.
Exactly. So that's sort of the two great examples that I can remember. And virtually every single circumstance that I come across in the lab, I will use an example of that. And so I had to grow up very quickly to be a PI, because I was about PI when I was like 28. So it was a long time ago. So I've had all this time to recount those stories, but I haven't run out of stories. And that's the remarkable thing, is that if you have a lot of experiences, every experience is a storytelling event. And that's the wonderful thing. That's why I was saying more about, sort of enjoying history for what it is. Every day is a moment of history. You should always think about it and put it in context and have a sort of tag on it in your brain. Everything that you do is important and worthy because it's your life. And, it's sort of, is there anything more important in your life? So science isn't just about stuff. It's about you progressing. And that's what your mentor or mentees or other mentors should be doing, is to make you better and better and better. It might not be incrementally in the science production world, but a better person. And it's sort of, that's the essence of mentoring. Make you a better person. Make you learn how to make your life better. It's sort of, life coaching in every single way. But we have to sort of merge that with the old-fashioned idea of mentor, is that a mentor should really be thinking about these things. And, I always tell, last cliche, mentor is for life, not just for Christmas and stuff. But
I love it.
It should be.
I love it. I think that's a fantastic way to end this episode. But let's explore more about mentoring and how the connection between a scientific mentor can make you a better human and can make you a mentor yourself in the next episode. And with this, thank you, Stuart, for your time. I cannot wait for us to pick up the conversation soon. With this, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for being here today. And I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for joining us and listening to this podcast episode. We'd like to thank our guest, as well as our team members, Attila Forrest and Ines Pinheiro. Please make sure that you subscribe to the Dr. GPCR newsletter, find us on YouTube, and if you like our podcast, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast. You can also leave us a testimonial at drgpcr.com/testimonials. Another great way to support us is to share your favorite Dr. GPCR program with your network and colleagues. Don't forget to check out and register for the Dr. GPCR ecosystem at drgpcr.com/ecosystem. Email us with any questions or suggestions at hello@drgpcr.com. Until next time, stay safe.